we transpose these relationships to the relationships that we held when European peoples arrived in North America. With the French people, we didn't enter into treaty relationships because they didn't tell us they were going to come and colonize our people or our lands. They held it to themselves. They talked to themselves, and the king and the explorers, the sailors, the discoverers, the captains of the ships, they knew that they were carrying the authority of the French king with them, and they could exercise it among themselves. And it was a real, but the idea that a French nation could arrive here and plant a flag and all the land turned blue, or whatever color the French country it represented, red, white, and blue. And so this is how they claim their territory, by planting a cross and a flag. But the indigenous people didn't know what are they doing anyway. I mean, like, it didn't seem anything offensive to us directly. It was our way of life, so there was no need to. I'm just going into what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the class, just in small detail for the next 10 minutes anyway. So the and they established their own sovereignty among themselves, but they didn't tell it to the indigenous peoples that are here. So they had conflicts in Europe. France had conflicts with Spain. France had conflicts with Germany. France had conflicts with England. And so when they arrived here, those conflicts arrived here with them when English arrived and settled themselves in New England. This part was called New France or Nouvelle France. And so they started to reach across from New England to New France. The British started coming and invading and arriving here among the French. And so little skirmishes out on the ocean, a little bit on the land against the fortified places like Halifax, Louisbourg, Beausejour, Port Royal, or Annapolis Royal. It got named afterwards when the British and the French. But the Indian people were kind of somehow, they were related to the Algonquin nations that were living in New England. And the British tried to use the New England Indians to come up here and fight against us. And the French allied with us, and so even the indigenous people started to because some of the objects of trade, some of the knives and spears, metal spears and swords and axes, perhaps they were better quality, and we wanted our connection with the French to keep getting these gifts from them while we gave our furs. And the same thing for the indigenous cultures in south of us, living among the English people. So these two entities, the foreign entities, were at war with one another all of a sudden from 1680s and 90s right up into 1760s. It resulted in 1755 the expulsion of around, they say 12 to 18,000 Acadians from Acadia or Nouvelle France, and they were shipped out back to France, back to England, the Jersey coast, to Louisiana in the United States, and some of the West Indies, and so on. So all the Acadian people ended up being dispersed. But the Indians, they didn't want to have war with the French, and they didn't want to have war with the English, so they entered into a treaty relationship with the English, a treaty of peace and friendship. So the treaties did not give us anything as indigenous people, anything that we didn't have already. We already had Aboriginal rights, like rights to take animals, take fish, take whatever we need to survive. And at that point in time, we still outnumbered the European entities that were living around us. So the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, Abenaki, Penobscot, Passamaquoddy nations were still a force to reckon with in the mid-1700s. And so land was not surrendered and our sovereignty was not surrendered. So it was just a treaty of peace and friendship. And the British said, okay, you'll stay out of the war, we'll give you presents once a year and make sure you get guns and ammunition and bullets, lead and flour and molasses and sugar and salt and so on and so forth. So those were objects of trade, blankets. Indian people started making clothing out of European blankets rather than the skins of animals. So that's why I'm so dressed so prim and proper right now. So it's because of our trading and our ambassadorial relations that we developed over time. So the treaty relations happened in the 1700s. They actually started in 1656 when an English sailor, fisherman, wanted to go ashore in Maine and he wanted to dry his fish. And he asked the indigenous nation that were ashore, they said, can we come ashore to build a wharf where we can and come ashore and dry our cod or our fish and build a house where we can stay and put a fence around the house. The Indian said, okay, yeah, you can do that, no problem. So the first treaty really for me is that it's the British people that came to shore that have a treaty right in North America to build a house and a wharf and a garrison, whatever, a fence around to protect themselves. So they said, you Indians stay on the other side and we stay on this side. People to stay here. But over time, the British people started to go and discover more territories and trade with more Indians, and then the Indians didn't get satisfaction, so they killed a few. And then the British representatives of the Crown came to the Indians and said, you guys broke the treaty. Yes, but you guys came into our territory. Yes, okay, we'll end our territory over here where you guys killed the British people. And so you guys stay out of this territory. It's ours now, and you guys stay in Indian territory. And so these kind of relationships developed over time between New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Maine, New Hampshire, and Boston, Massachusetts. The area in between started to be determined as Indian land, and everything else around there started to be encroached upon, and more treaties. So there were treaties from as early as 1656, and the last treaty was in 1779 in the Miramichi, and one on the St. John River after the American Revolution had ended. And so that was the end of the treaty relationships, and they were just more or less peace and friendship treaties to agree not to fight each other.